Welcome to This Should Be a Game, a podcast about adaptive media and filtering 90% of your experiences through tabletop role-playing games. I'm Satah, I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on Bluesky at posatachips.gaygothvibes.online or check out my website at gaygothvibes.online. I think that I'm in a little inflatable raft in the middle of an ocean and being pulled into a helicopter, maybe, I think is where I am. Is that where we are, Jess?
Yeah, I think I'd rather pick you up in a helicopter than a big naval boat. Like, I'm a pilot, so yeah, I'm gonna swoop down, pick you up in this helicopter.
Was it the Navy? Was it naval? Am I thinking of one of the other movies that we...
I am 90% sure it was naval, but we're making it a helicopter now. These are our games.
Okay.
And so... I, of course, pick you up and immediately introduce you by my Bluesky handle, which is at jessfrom.online, which also happens to be my website, and where you can find me pretty much anywhere. You can also find me as Jumpgate Games, pretty much anywhere that games are.
Wonderful. And it is just the two of us today. We are going to be wrapping up our series where we used the movie Apollo 13 to talk about a game. I'm stalling because I don't remember the year that Apollo 13
1995.
Came out.
I almost cut right in.
It is so unfortunate.
Arrested Development style running gag.
I wish I were doing a bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I get that it is a running gag. I wish that it were like something I were doing on purpose. But no, this is just the brain space that evidently Apollo 13 has taken up.
Yes.
You know what it actually is? I'm already devoting all of that potential brain space to remembering which number goes after Apollo. I can't remember
100%.
any other numbers associated with it because I have to remember 13.
See, I thought you were going to say that 1995 was taken up by seminal movies Hackers, best movie all time, Hackers 1995. You have to add
That's
the 1995.
true. That was pretty much
knows.
the only movie that came out in 1995 now that I think about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is the last one. This is the final one. We're going to be wrapping it up. We're going to be talking through all of the ideas that we talked about with our guests. We're going to be sort of like not making the game in full, but just presenting a slightly more complete picture of what it might be, naming some open questions, ultimately sort of inviting people to maybe, hey, do you want to make this game that we're talking about? Sick. That's great. We'll have infrastructure for that. Maybe we'll be able to talk about it in a little place where we talk about stuff. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities. I turned on podcasting energy and I think I was so low energy before we started recording that turning on podcast energy, I sort of overshot and I got a little loopy.
I was about to say, you're bringing the silly podcast energy, which, like, it's great.
I'm getting a little goofy. But here we are. Where are we at? Not the helicopter or naval boat question, but where are we at with our Apollo 13 game?
Yeah, if I had to summarize the things that I feel confident we know about this game, if I had to give my movie summary but for our game, we are doing a 3-person asynchronous, fairly epistolary game with very asymmetric experiences. Those 3 people are an astronaut who is stranded in space in some way, a media player who is playing the people reporting on the astronaut, and the sort of centerpiece and starting point, a spouse or wife character who has to manage her life and the home while her spouse husband, if I'm playing this, I'm just doing anachronistic open out lesbians, but her astronaut spouse is gallivanting about space and she has to hold everything down and deal with the stress of that, and she's only hearing things through the media, and that's where this very asymmetric experience comes in, because the next thing we've talked about is how the astronaut is playing pretty much a solo epistolary game, where they are writing some journal entries, maybe doing some like puzzling through space problems, and then outputting a brief from their space agency that they send over to the media player. But they don't hear back. They're in love with the moon. Their game is not about their spouse back home.
I don't remember a lot of writing from the astronaut.
Yeah, the place that writing on the astronaut side comes in for me is one, the NASA brief as an output, but that was meant to be very terse and not super detailed. So I think that dovetails with what you're saying. And then I did remember having a conversation about the idea that what the media interprets their experience as, the astronaut's experience as, should relate to the astronaut's interpretation of their own experience. That's part of why the NASA brief is there.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that implied the idea that the astronaut was writing down their experience. But as you say that, it's making me realize that that was an implication I read in, which I think is actually very interesting, because it could be much more ephemeral. They're interpreting their experiences as they go, but they're not producing artifacts that concretely say what their experience was. I think the other place I'm drawing that from is the idea that you get together at the end and you all are like, so how was your experience? What was all the stuff in private that we don't know about? And I was assuming that for the astronaut character, they would have written artifacts to share during that conversation. But as I start to realize how much I was reading into this, they don't have to necessarily write it down and develop a concrete picture that is a written artifact for them to be able to talk about, for them to look at the media player and the wife player's journaling and say, oh, that's not how I imagined this was going down, or these are the details of how I was feeling that you all had no idea about. Those can exist in the astronaut's head, and it would sort of be up to like the final implementation here, how much you want the astronaut to be concretely writing that down in a private way.
Yeah, we have, in the time since the episode, like the other episode recordings we did, sort of like gave a little bit of time for the ideas to just sink in. We kicked around a couple of more specific design thoughts. One of the things that I'm thinking about is we laid a lot of intentions for the astronaut to be doing sort of the most mechanically intensive gameplay.
Yes.
There were a lot of discussions about card transformations and moves and Texas Hold'em, which I still don't understand, might never understand unless Balatro puts in a Texas Hold'em version, and then I will probably be forced to learn in some way. And one of the things I've been thinking is that in order to keep the 3 different player experiences equitable, even if they are very different, I think the astronaut can't be allowed to write down a lot of feelings.
Absolutely.
Because I think that should, for the most part, be reserved for the wife character. I think that there are versions of this where that isn't the case, and we just make sure everybody has both their feelings gameplay and their something else gameplay. But just from sort of like where we're at right now, the baseline, I think that the astronaut can only, or at least in the rules, you know, you can do whatever you want. If you're having astronaut feelings, you're allowed to write them down. I think that a rule I'm thinking about suggesting is you're in space, there's limited recording capacity. We are not allowing you can't just have a diary.
Yeah.
Like your calls,
plus all your shit's public record.
Like, yeah, all of your shit is public record. You cannot be talking about that where like if you talk about your feelings that in a way that like makes us look bad, that will be a problem. And so I am leaning towards the idea that the astronaut definitely does provide, you know, their story of like, here's what just happened to me. But I would lean towards not being super feelings focused for the astronaut, because I the astronaut already has this very sort of exclusive gameplay of these weird card mechanics and stuff. And I really want to make sure that that we're not doing the same thing that the movie does.
I think that's a really good label for it.
Which is like, yeah, you know, give the astronaut really cool stuff to do and also the center of their feelings.
Yes.
Meanwhile, when we sort of like came into these episodes, starting with Dylan, we wanted a lot of the focus to be on the spouse's experience.
Yes.
And making sure that that kind of stays a little bit core to the gameplay, I think, is important.
I think that's a really, really smart insight as to how we don't replicate these mistakes and how easy it is to fall into these pit traps. In a way, it's really good. And I do think, as you sort of gestured to, there would be room. I would love to see two designers take on this project, and one of them does the game where each role does the sort of minimum that keeps them in parity, and they have very different experiences. And then another one does a version of the game that is maximalist, where you achieve parity by giving each role their sort of feelings journaling, and then giving each role some sort of complicated set of mechanics that they're managing. And I think there were seeds of what that could be up and down the line in our episodes, because like with Dylan, we talked about the idea that the wife is managing stress. And, like, that didn't continue to come up beyond, like, the feeling of it as much as the conversation continued. But the idea that there is a stress tracker and that the events in the wife's life are meaning that she has to in some way manage that tracker starts to introduce more mechanic. And I don't think that is core to what we're doing. And I think you're good to point out that if we are boiling it down to the core, really the wife gets these abilities to express and note her feelings, and the astronaut does these card transformations. I'm just so fascinated by the idea of these minimalist and maximalist versions of what this game could be.
Yeah, and I think the reason that I am not as intrigued by the maximalist version is that I think that those games already exist.
Absolutely.
A lot more, you know? And to be clear, that is not a condemnation. Everyone should absolutely make games that already exist. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I am pulled to the, like, what is a unique expression here? And it does feel to me that, like, the asymmetric, asynchronous, narrative-y journaling type thing, or just, like, having those strict expressions, those rules on, like, because I wouldn't be telling the astronaut player they can't have feelings. I wouldn't be saying their character can't have feelings. I'm telling them you can't write it down.
Yeah.
Or at least I always feel the need to, especially when it comes to accessibility stuff or stuff that would approach accessibility stuff, I feel the urge to sort of rule zero. Like, none of this is real, you know, do whatever you want forever.
If you have memory problems and you need to express
Of course you can keep a private diary so that when you're talking about the game with your friends later, you can be like, oh, right, I totally forgot on that day this happened and it made me feel this. But I think that is outside the game in a lot of ways.
The game is not structuring that for us. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you're so right that the asymmetry of this game is part of what makes it so unique and fascinating, and so leaning into that feels like it is true to some of the initial vision of this game in an interesting way.
Yeah. And I think it's so funny because in this conversation, we've really mostly talked about the astronaut and the spouse, but it was the introduction of the media player that sort of like, it felt like broke open the conversation in a lot of 100%. Ways. And I continue to be so fascinated by that as a role. Like, when we are talking about these things, even in conversations we've had about the game off mic when we've just been sort of like bullshitting, the media player kind of falls to the wayside really easily.
Yeah.
But I don't consider that to be true of the actual experience of playing this theoretical game. And it's really funny what a weird place that is to be in.
And I want to ask you in that case, like, what do you think is core? If you had to describe what is core to the media player's experience of this game, what would that be to you?
Could you maybe give me that question rephrased in a different way?
What are they trying to do And what does that look like to like really capture what we've talked about with the media? What's their objective, and how are they accomplishing that to your vision?
My lasting impression of the media player from sort of the ways we've talked about it in my memory and the thoughts I've had since is that they are just there to have fun and be a little chaotic, you know? I think each of these, in my view, could be their own solo game, essentially.
Definitely.
I think the media player is interesting because they act as the hinge, essentially, between the two other players. They are the main way that information can flow from one to the other, at least, probably. And I think that they are, in a lot of ways, they're maybe the most disconnected. Like, it's the thing that is, it is the role that is the most, you could most replace other players with just, like, a random table or that kind of thing. But I think that's cool and fun.
I really want to build off of that. One of the fun things about this episode is we get to talk about like what would it be like to build this game and like to implement this game in full. Mm-hmm. And there is a fascinating idea that what you said there brings up for me, which is to imitate the asymmetry of the experience of playing this game in the experience of designing this game. Because a thing I think a lot about with mechanical systems is the interfaces between them, the inputs and outputs. And this is a game, because it is asynchronous and asymmetric, that has really defined inputs and outputs between players. The astronaut...
Theoretically.
Yes, theoretically. The astronaut has a brief that they are giving to the media player. The media player has some sort of depiction of these events that they're giving to the wife. Mm-hmm. And anywhere we see this really hard, clean interface could instead be an oracle. Like you said, if we view each of these as solo games, anything that is like a really defined output or input from another player could instead just be a really good oracle table instead of another player. And I could even see a design process. I'm imagining 3 different designers designing the game as if they're getting like oracle inputs, but then it turns out those inputs are coming from a game designed by another designer. I am not necessarily saying that's what this has to be or was the vision, but I'm just fascinated by the ways that you pointing out that these are like 3 different solo games is like, you could even have a design process that is writing in that way and then tying them together, and that would be super unique too.
And
it'd probably be a mess.
Yes. Sometimes it's worth doing a fun experiment. For sure. I think that does speak to one of the things that I find challenging thinking about this game, and also interesting, which is I like the idea that it's the equity, it's the all of the games, all of the rules are different, but I ideally would want them to have some amount of through line, so it is recognizable that you are all playing together.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that, like, the ideas we've tossed around for the astronaut and the media, that definitely comes through with the idea that, you know, the astronaut is giving a certain poker hand to the media, and then the media is doing something with that, maybe changing the poker hand. At one point between recordings, we specifically talked about the idea that the media would be changing the astronaut's poker hand to whatever meets the media's goals of, like, I'm portraying this in a specific way to get a specific effect. And then the difference between the hand that the astronaut dealt and the hand that the media shows affects the wife.
I really love that.
Her stress level. Like, it's like, okay, you gave me a royal flush. I needed to change it into just a flush. The difference between those is 1 card. And so you give the wife 1 of something, you know? And I think, like, that is ultimately, to me, the big challenge of making this, even if you do have 3 different designers sort of exquisite corpsing this, like, here, design a game where at the end you'll have a poker hand to give to somebody else. That's cool. And also, yeah, to me, that would be a fun experiment and genuinely something that would be so fun to do with people. but it would not be to me a finished game until there was cohesion between all of the roles. One of the things that is difficult about that, and again, interesting, I think usually when I say difficult, often I'm going to mean difficult and interesting, is that it isn't a loop. That would be different.
Yeah.
Because
that forces you to be a little more coherent, and this is actually more challenging because of the ways that you're not forced. It can get out of proportion because you don't have to make it work as a loop. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Because ultimately the communication stops at the wife player.
Yeah.
Unless, I mean, she can probably, we've talked a little bit, I think, about her communicating back to the media, you know, whether that is like mechanically or just like, yeah, you're allowed to send a reporter to the wife and role play a little weird scene or whatever, you know? Mm-hmm. But there is no communication. If there's communication between the wife and the astronaut, the entire concept of the game changes.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, there would be ways to have it so that the wife sends a narrative thing to the astronaut, right? Like the wife player also generates a specific memory and then gives that to the astronaut, and the astronaut then has to deal with having that memory come up. And I think that could even be cool and interesting, but I like enforcing with the mechanics. No, even narratively, even just in the abstract, you do not have communication to this other person, this other player, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And something that we haven't really talked about today that I might want to get back to that I think builds on that is that something we talked about a lot at various points was, what does the beginning and the end of this game look like? And how are they different than the center? And that enforced separation and that huge restriction is part of what made the ending so powerful, of what it means to get back together and be reunited and find out what other people's experiences were like. And so I think you're right that like really realizing this vision requires leaning into that aspect. But before we maybe talk more about that, I wanted to revisit some of the things that you were saying about like, how do you have coherence between these mechanics, and what does the minimalist version of this game that is most unique look like? And I think something we talked about a little bit in between episodes is like, what is the media doing? These like card transformation mechanics that are a little less than what the astronaut's doing. And that, it has me thinking about these roles in a gradient where the astronaut is very much on the finickiest end of the gradient with the least ability to note and express feelings. Mm-hmm. And then the media has some of the finickiness of the astronaut, but then also is doing this editorializing by producing these artifacts that is not personal in the ways that the wife's is. There isn't as much internality, but there is editorializing in a way that the astronaut is not. And then the wife really leans into the internality and editorializing with much less of the finicky aspects. And so the media role is not only passing off information, but also plays like an interesting connector role in transitioning the mechanics down the line.
Yeah.
And I think that's super fascinating from a design perspective.
Yeah, totally.
And I think is also one of the trickiest things to do in maintaining parody is like, how do you give them a little bit of both without it turning into too much? And I think your idea of the media's few transformations generating stress or these additional problems for the wife was a really, really smart way to do that and pass those mechanics down the line, getting it simpler in each step.
I do think that the wife needs something to do with cards.
Yeah.
Other than just, you know, when we've talked about it, it's sort of been pulling prompts and that kind of thing. I am feeling like the wife needs some similar type of creating hands mechanic. I'm just not totally sure what that would be. I think it could be that you're drawing several prompts and you get to keep cards where you succeed at whatever that complication is, you know, that kind of thing. Like, here's 5 things that you have to deal with today. The ones that you manage to do, you keep.
Something that I think I talked about in the Dylan episode, or if I didn't talk about it, that I was really thinking about, is that it was the idea that some of your prompts are coming from sort of oracle cards that you're pulling, and then some are coming down from the astronaut to the media, and you're forced to put them together to construct the situation that you are in. So the idea that, because to me that really thematically captured, I have to deal with the problems that my spouse in space is generating for me. That like the feeling of having to really balance. And I don't know that really gets all the way to what you're saying, but when I think about what the wife might be doing mechanically, I just really like the idea of some of the inputs are coming from the wife because they're coming from the life that she has on the ground, and some of the inputs are filtering down because she has to deal with this thing that she has no control over, and the situation that she has to face is the amalgamation of those two things.
Can you give me like an example of what that would mean or look like, maybe?
The simplest version, and the one that I think I was thinking about in episode 1, is just you have 2 tables, and one of them is a card you pull, and the other is a card that came from the media, which came from the astronaut in some way, and it's literally just 2 prompt tables. I think as you label that the wife has to be engaged in some way in this sort of like card system, it would make sense for it to be a little more engaging than just like 2 cards that are 2 table lookups that you interpret how they're related. And I'm going to think for a sec on what that could look like, because I feel like I haven't been exploring that space in my head as much between episodes, but I feel like I feel like it lends itself to it if I think for a second.
One thing I do want to say is that there's a lot of the stuff with hands of cards and that kind of thing that doesn't make sense to me when it comes to like statistics and strategy and that kind of thing. And so I don't feel strictly that I would want to implement those exact types of systems, but just something that interfaces with them, essentially.
Tell me if this either is too complicated or isn't complicated enough to your vision of this. The wife character draws 5 cards, draws like a full poker hand or something that is in some way representative of both how bad the situation she's in is, like how many factors that she's dealing with, and the content of them in a way that's like oracle lookups. And like if she just draws at complete random a better 5-card poker hand, her situation is less bad, and a worse 5-card poker hand, her situation is worse. And then when the media makes these transformations, that really great idea that you had of like that generates problems for the wife, she has to get rid of cards. She draws less cards. So either she draws 7 at first or she draws 5 at first. 7 would actually keep it more consistent with how the astronauts thing works. It's more Texas Hold'em-y. And each time the media transforms a card and sensationalizes or minimizes, and like I think a way that you framed it when we were talking was like creating cognitive dissonance for the wife of like, that doesn't make sense. And that's not how I thought that this was. Like what that removes a card, making the wife's hand likely worse or situation worse.
I think I'd also be interested in a version where all 3 people are technically playing a slightly different card game and it isn't poker hands.
Oh,
like, especially because the like physical transformation stuff that we talked a lot about with Viditya that I love, like being able to like rip cards up and that kind of thing, that becomes a lot harder to plan for in the other layers, because if you're asking the media, like, you now have the king of 8s, do something with that, it's like, well, I can't. I can't do anything with that. And so I wonder if there's like, because one of the things I was thinking was that there's a version where the wife has almost like a little bit of a blackjack setup instead. And so it's like cards coming down from the astronaut and from the media are like forced hits.
Oh my God.
You know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
And that leads into the asymmetry too.
Yeah. And that could be fun. And then I just like, I would love to have that difference be consistent by having the media also not necessarily directly doing poker hands.
Interesting.
There's one possibility where the media is essentially just like every card that the astronaut puts in a hand literally just gets given to the media to do whatever they want with. And their goal is to like, they're building some kind of categories of cards, almost like they're not literally playing solitaire, but there is like, you're trying to arrange your cards in a specific way, you know?
And I actually love that because we did talk about solitaire with Dylan, and even if it isn't, and we did talk about blackjack briefly. The idea of, I actually think this is a really nice process example of like picking stuff up off the cutting room floor as in the final step you realize that things are missing. Yeah. Like you throw things out in part of a game design process, and then you go, now I've found where the hole is. Let's patch it up with some of the stuff that we left out. Otherwise. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing that.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I've been playing a lot of solitaire on neopets.com. Can you get better at solitaire? Is that like a skill that you can build? Because I keep not doing well at solitaire, and I don't understand if there's anything I can do about that. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, and I am solitaire is one of my big gaps in card games. I think I said this with Dylan. We got to have Dylan back to answer. We got to phone a friend here. Because I have no idea if that's possible, because I haven't played it since I was playing it on my grandfather's Windows 98 computer in the computer room.
Yeah, similar, I think.
Shout out millennial listeners.
One of the things about all of this is like, one of probably, I guess it's one of the big open questions about a lot of the different format stuff of this game, what it even looks like, is how you are playing it. Because some of the stuff we've talked about with physically transforming cards implies sometimes you either meet up and hand cards off or mail them, or I guess you could send pictures and that kind of thing, but that feels... There's some awkwardness there that is interesting, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff about this. I think that it is there's a version of this game that is that asks you to build a very specifically formatted Discord server or something similar, you know?
That's how I kept envisioning it. I think we even mentioned Will Yopest's friend of the show, guest of the show, Will Yopest's This Discord has ghosts in it in one of the episodes, because it's a game that has a very specific Discord. And I think I kept envisioning a Discord with setup channels that are even like paralleling what they represent fictionally, like a media broadcast channel and like the NASA press announcement channel is how I was envisioning it. And then what you said of taking pictures of cards, I totally, like, that was my vision of how they got passed around. But you're right that with the physical, like, alterations to cards, that gets much trickier. And we could design around that in what the recipients are doing, but it does take designing around. I also kept feeling, as I was trying, like, between episodes to really think on how we would realize this, I kept having temptations to sand down the card physical transformation elements and have it be more like you may use this card as if it was a different card in this way without actually physically changing them. But I do think that loses something important and fun of what we talked to Viditya about.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those things I'm so... Wreck This Deck kind of games are such a conflict for me because I love them so much conceptually. I think that they are doing something really cool, and also the prospect of ruining a deck of cards is like anathema to me. Like it I can't personally do it. Whenever I've played Wreck This Deck style games, I have used scrap paper to make my own deck of cards that I've hand drawn and used, and I always find this to be conflicting because I love the idea. I would love to have that present in this game in some form because I think it's really cool, and I think it's really themey with what the astronaut repurposing stuff. Like, I think that is awesome. Would I personally do it? it would be difficult for me to be convinced.
I think I have some of those same impulses too. I also do amateur cardistry in a way that I feel precious about cards, in part for that reason.
I'm not precious about them. It feels so wasteful.
Yes. And the other thing is, I am such an obsessive playtester where I want to do that over and over and over and over again. And the idea of destroying like 15 decks of cards while I'm trying out this experience over and over again makes me insane. And I think that made me chafe at it too. And like, you're right, you can draw your own paper deck, but it's a little more of a pain in the ass. And so I think I felt myself having friction at that because my imagination of what it would be to playtest this game would be like, I gotta destroy so many decks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's something that should stop you from designing something, you know? Like, I mean, I have a very specific experience, like, perspective on that, because I have discovered, especially over the past couple of years, that the games I want to design are not usually the games I want to play. I have a lot of friends who are like, I make games because I want to play those games. I saw a game I wanted to play, it didn't exist, so I made it, and now I play it. And that is so not my experience of things. I like thinking through design challenges, and then I do it, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm done with this. I've had my experience with it. And that's not me being averse to playtesting. Like, that is a whole other different thing. Playtesting is difficult for its own complicated, emotional interaction with criticism.
Yes.
and wanting everything to be perfect the first time I do it thing. But it's just, yeah, essentially a tangent, but just something I've been thinking a lot about in the past couple of years, where like, even with module stuff, like, I love writing adventure module type content. If I'm GMing a game, I don't want to use adventure module content. I want to come up with it myself. And so
Same.
I love designing stuff that I will not use, which is so weird.
I feel like the friction you're describing, I have had to bring myself into more coherence between those things out of like emotional and logistical necessity. I think with going rogue, I started to experience that friction so much between what I was wanting to design and what I was wanting to play. And I think for Planet Fist, I was like, I have to, because of how I want to play test, I have to design something I have fun playing, because I just need that to be able to keep working on it. So I feel you on that.
Yeah. And I think that as we're thinking about like how are different ways that people can play this, I think that there is a version of this where the thing you're doing is fucking up a bunch of JPEGs, you know? Like,
absolutely.
Here's a card.
That makes it easier to pass off too.
Yeah. One of the things could, like, the game could even have a download of like, here's 52 JPEGs. You are allowed to cut and paste this many pixels or whatever, that kind of thing, you know?
Oh my god, I love this. And I've never seen this. This is such a fun implementation of what we were talking about, because the card artifacts you get when you're allowed to Photoshop crop is so different. That's so fun. Oh my god.
God, throwback to Over Under when I was in Conclave and cheating by sending you really badly cropped screenshots of stuff that was happening in the conclave, because we weren't allowed to have outside contact, but I was just role playing as somebody who was spying on the conclave.
Yes, like a chorister who was like using listening devices or listening through walls, and so it was weird bad crops, and I'm trying to communicate to the Bratva bosses that like I'm getting some information and it's true, but it's not good information, and being like, what's the fictional border? What's the rules border here? Ugh, what a great...
This, I mean, we literally cannot start talking about Over Under, because anybody who was in Over Under will just talk about Over Under, but like, this is one of the things that is fascinating to me and is actually relevant to this conversation of like playing a game that has hidden information or secrets in a digital platform where you can easily give perfect information to other people through screenshots and message forwarding and that kind of thing. Something I learned about myself is that takes an enormous amount of the fun out of conspiracy for me.
Yeah.
Because, like, if betrayal literally only takes, I took a screenshot and I sent it to somebody, it's like, well, you didn't even work for that. Like, yeah. You should have to smuggle a listening device into our conversation and then find a private way to meet up with the person who you're selling the information to. You shouldn't be able to just, like, in 15 seconds be like, screen cap, betrayed. Like, you didn't earn that. You didn't earn that. And so, you know, I was not allowed to be talking to you at all while I was in Conclave, but I thought it would be more fun to be like, well, I'm going to play this like I would play it in a physical space, which is this person can't be here, can't have perfect information.
Yes.
And so I'm not going to give you perfect information. I'm going to give you a Discord screenshot that only gets the top half of the pixels of the message and some of the person's username.
That's actually really interesting when we go way back to the beginning of this conversation about the astronaut not producing feelingsy artifacts. The idea that, like, there literally isn't even anything that could be being passed is also interesting, and just, like, how it parallels the experience of the astronaut is not communicating to the wife. The astronaut also isn't producing things that could be communicated to the wife.
I have a pitch. More accurately, I have two pitches.
Yeah.
A version of this game that is played on Discord or whatever. And then there's the LARP version of this game where everything's physical, right?
We got the mega game version. Ding ding.
A vision that is coming to me for the Discord version is that there is that number of channels, and there are limitations on who is allowed to post in each one.
Yes.
So, for instance, the astronaut is allowed to post in a NASA audio stream channel. That can be like random status reports. That can be like, as the astronaut is working through their problem, they like pull a card or whatever, they pull their 5 cards. I will never understand how Texas Hold'em works. I don't know how many cards this person is looking at, but they're looking at some cards, and they are like, the table that is built is like telling them, okay, there was you sketched out a couple of tables for what the astronaut problems could be. Would you mind sending those to me?
Yeah, absolutely can do.
Okay, and just remind me, I'm looking at a table of cards that have like a system or something, a thing that something could go wrong with. How many of those cards at a time is the astronaut looking at sort of the very first step of the problem?
In my sort of sketch of what the astronaut might look like, at the initial step, they have 5 cards that are face up. Only 3 of them mean something about the situation and are used like on this table to be like, these 3 different systems are places where there are problems. So 3.
Okay, cool. So let's say the astronaut sees that there is or could be a problem with the lighting, with navigation, and with their engines. In the public channel that only they're allowed to post in, they're sending a short message being like, Houston, not sure if there was we maybe passed over an electromagnetic current as we were in rotation there, but things got a little dim in the cabin, checking in. And, you know, they're just tiny little status reports of the problems that they're noticing.
Interesting.
And I think my vision of it would be that we're only seeing the astronauts half of the conversation, but in the way that you might talk to an R2-D2, the other part of the conversation is implied. Like, the astronaut could send a message like, yeah, absolutely heard, gonna check that system right now. You know, that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
And that's playing off of what we talked about earlier with the, like, this is in the public record. Anything you say on the radio, we know. And this is like, everyone can see this. The wife can see this. The media can see it. And I think, like, that's really interesting to me that, like, this is accessible to everyone. Because that is one of the things with the wife, right? Like, yes, most of the information does have to come from the media. But as I think we talked about with Dylan, like, she does have
the little radio,
some inside information, right? She has the radio, and she has like a NASA advisor being like, here's something that happened, or here's something we're absolutely not telling you about, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. And like, I felt that we had moved away from that, but I really liked the idea of representing that, so I'm glad you brought it back in, because I think it also creates interesting dissonance in a way that was stressful for the wife character. Is like the media is reporting one thing and her little NASA radio is telling her something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's a super interesting friction point to give to the wife character.
Yeah. And so I think there's sort of the channel's called, like, you know, it's got some code for the specific radio feed that's being picked up, you know? And it's just like public communications, either just from the astronaut, or the astronaut could play both the astronaut and a NASA operator. I lean towards the R2-D2 style of assumed communication thing just because I think that's interesting. It might be difficult for some people to imagine how to do it,
Totally.
But I don't think it's impossible. And I think that could be cool. Then you have, the media obviously has at least one public channel, possibly multiple. They might have a forum or something where, like, whatever program they have either decided or rolled will, like, oh yeah, so in addition to the public channel, the astronaut has a private channel where they're sending cards to the media.
Yes.
Then the media is doing something with that privately.
And maybe that's also attached to like a brief from NASA, because that's something we talked about. A sort of end of day brief that says like, these are the things that happened that go with the cards, but like very tersely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It could be for sure. And I think that would make sense. And then I think the media doesn't have a private channel.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense to. Besides where they
Yes.
receive from the astronaut.
Besides
which is
where
one
they
way.
receive that. Yeah, and so I think they're just always broadcasting, doing whatever it is that, you know, however the, like, if there's the card transformation mechanic, however that's narrativized, they're deciding, like, I'm going to put on a show that uses whatever, I'm going to feature a doctor who literally has no connection to this mission, but I know will come on and be an expert. You know, they're talking about their shows. I think they're probably sending a lot of voice notes.
Oh, that's fun. Absolutely. Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Something I really liked that I think we talked about in the Viditi episode was sometimes distinctions between like breaking news and then like editorializing in between, and the idea that there are different types of shows or different networks. And like when we were thinking through this a little bit between the episode and we're talking about like the media doing card transformations, one of my ideas for tying narrative and mechanic there was the idea that like different ways of transforming cards to achieve the media's objective require different types of shows or different types of guests. And so we have these very narrative guest tables that are like the wife characters' very narrative tables, but then the media is employing those tables to do the card transformation. It's giving fictional meaning to the ways that they do that. And that forms, again, that little bridge between the astronaut's version of things and the wife's version of things, I feel like.
Yeah, as an example, some of the like sort of sketching I did between episodes was a media prompt that it's just 2 D6 tables that give sort of like, this is a daytime talk show segment, or this is a late night show. And then the guest is a politician, a psychic, someone from the astronaut's personal life. And I think that you could easily like, we'll probably just, we have some notes. We did a decent amount of just like sketching and writing between these. We'll probably throw a version of this up on the Patreon just so people can kind of see like what we were thinking about and what we were thinking would be possible to work towards with this. But yeah, having those tables or something like that tied to, similar to how we talked about the astronauts' moves come from the crew.
Yes.
Like, this type of crew will let you tear a card in half, or especially if we're focusing on the digital version, like you can invert the colors of
oh my god
a card, you know, that kind of thing. And similarly with the media, it could be like, okay, you need to make this seem worse. You need the situation to seem more drastic than it is. Check out this table. You need to use one of these guests or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. And I think it's possible that I do think there's a few versions of this. Like, the media could have a bunch of channels and all of them are a different network. They could have a forum, they could have different threads. I'm not sure. I think that even in this 3-part game, I think that the media is the easiest to be like, well, But my group, we have 4. We have 4 besties, and every game we play together, there's 4 of us. Like, okay, cool. 2 of you are the media. You just focus on different networks or whatever, you know?
Absolutely.
And then I think the wife doesn't have a public channel at all unless she is invited to one by the media for specific periods of time.
100% yes.
And I think the wife is mostly posting journal entries privately. You know, is doing whatever the mechanical stuff is to like pulling prompts of like what's some of the stuff I wrote down.
I really liked something that you wrote down that I just want to draw attention to because I think it was so good, which is like, I know you had the table of like feelings, but these were feelings that other people were having that the wife was having to deal with and react to.
Yeah, this was a way I was concepting this is, you know, I think that we talked about this with Dylan, that it would be like each suit is a different area of life and then the value of the card is a more specific prompt. And the way that I was sort of thinking about it was in this version, you pull 2 cards and then you make something of that. So I have it all written out. So I'm just going to pull 2 cards here and we'll talk it through
Yeah,
live.
absolutely.
And I'll explain more about what you mean, because I totally forgot about that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that I had been thinking about it that way. Oh, right. I have to shuffle these cards a lot because I dropped them the other day, and I was really worried that some cards had fallen in the garbage, and I don't have good working memory, and so counting cards is difficult for me, and so I separated them all into suits. I organized them so they are 2. They're all in order right now.
Autism baby stacking cans.
I had to stack the cans.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I really feel you.
Okay. So, let's say I have the 2 of hearts. I pull those jokers. And the 4 of diamonds. All of the suits are a different category. The ones I have written down are familial, social, domestic, and external. Those labels are not great, but one of the things I was really wanting to focus on was I didn't want it to be work and home for those last 2 categories, because it's really important to me to recognize domestic labor as labor.
100%.
And also to have work also be something like volunteering. Like maybe this is not somebody who, maybe this is a single income family, because if it's in the past, maybe that was possible. And so maybe this person, like they have duties for the home, which is the domestic labor and it's reproductive labor and it's grocery shopping and all that shit. Then they also have their external responsibilities that aren't community-based specifically. They're not about friends. They're not about family. They're about going to work. They're about volunteering. They're about going to PTA meetings, you know?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
This is one of those things where if you think too hard about anything, you can destroy all of the categories that feel real. And I'm really good at that. And I do think that that is a positive skill politically.
Yes.
But also it makes trying to say what is a social responsibility and what is a domestic or... I drove myself a little crazy because I was thinking about gender. This happens.
Same.
And then the 2 different values tables that I have are, one is sort of like events or situations. There's something like, in this case, a 2 and a 4 could either be a party or a visit. And then the other table is feelings. And as you say, these are not feelings that I am prescribing to the person who's writing. This isn't, a 2 and a 4 would be grief and excitement. I'm not saying, okay, you have to come up with an event that you are excited about or that you are grieving. I'm saying someone else in this situation is feeling those feelings and you have to manage them or respond to them or deal with them in some way, because that felt like it really helped to drive home the lack of control that this role has and sort of the very much responding to external situations thing. Like, I'm not even going to address your feelings. Your feelings can be whatever they are, but I can tell you that somebody in this is excited. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is your shitty kid like, something awful happened, I'm so pumped? Or is your not shitty kid like, wow, I did something really good, I'm feeling great about that? You know, you get to sort of decide that. And so here we have the Two of Hearts. That is a party that is familial in some way. The examples that I've given are not only people, but locations. So this could be a party that is with your in-laws, or it could be a party that's at your cousin's house. Then we have the Four of Diamonds, which is excitement that is social. So one of your friends is pumped. That kind of thing. And then you just tie all that together. And so there's some sort of party that one of your friends or neighbors is really into. Maybe your neighbor is excited that you're throwing this party with your family because your neighbor is recently divorced and really has their eye on your brother and is like, ooh, so your brother's going to be in town? And you're like, yes. And she's like, oh, that's awesome. You know? And then in reaction to that, more stuff would happen, but in part you would be like talking about like, okay, well, now I have to plan for this party. Now I have to send out invitations, or I have to welcome people, and then you'd probably pull other events and be like, oh, the party conflicts with the fact that my kid has a test tomorrow that they have to study for, so they'll be really annoyed if it's too loud or whatever, and that kind of thing. And yeah.
I'm thinking about the idea you had for blackjack earlier and how it ties into this actually really neatly, because in blackjack, you start with 2 cards.
Oh, that's true.
And you have your initial situation, and then for every like transformation the media does or whatever, you have another auto hit.
Yeah.
And then if you end up under 21, you manage these situations well, and you express how you manage them well. And if you end up over 21, the amount that you are over is how poorly this goes for you. And so you get a tenor of how you handle this from the cards coming down from the media.
Yeah, and I think that there can probably be, we can give like win condition ranges, right? Like if you stop at 10, you're still not doing really well, because you still want to push up to
closer
21,
to 21,
right? Still.
So you can hit even if,
And there's something that is really lovely about that, to be like, I think that actually does, I think that there should be a curve. There's the curve of success and failure, right? Like you want to be, and if you get to 22, yes, something bad happened, but it's not going to be a disaster, you know? And I think that actually does a really cool, that gives it that balancing act, keeping up with the Joneses ass type of thing, right? Where it's
you gotta keep pushing, but if it's too much, it's too much.
Yes. Oh, you stopped at 10? You only did 2 things today?
Oh my God.
Good for you.
Yes.
You know? Like,
oh, fuck. Absolutely.
that keeps like, that keeps that pressure up. And that's really fun.
That also introduces another piece of parody that I really like.
Yeah.
Because going back to the astronaut player, when I was like sketching out tables, in addition to the card value table, which you demonstrated, I did a solution table. And the solution table is like how good of the hand you produced translates to where you leave these problems off. So if you get 2 pair, which is like pretty likely hand, which means it's a worse situation, hours on the clock. The crises you face today are spiraling out of control, and you just have hours to solve them before you and your crewmates die. Whereas if you get a straight, 1 crisis at a time, multiple crises from today remain, but less than you started with, and you can afford to take it 1 at a time. So it's not like hours and things are bad. It's like, okay, let's solve the next thing. And then if you get like 4 of a kind, which is where you start entering the really unlikely hands, impending danger. You've solved today's crises, but at the cost of a new issue that you're going to need to get started on right away. And what that's doing is defining, based on the outcome of your card game, how bad is the situation. And then they're sort of ranges, right? Because of the way like assembling a poker hand works. And so when in blackjack,
sorry, can you explain that to me? Why they're ranges?
I guess maybe they aren't ranges. Let me think for a second.
Okay.
These feel similar to ranges to me because in Texas Hold'em, like 7-card poker hands, there are these really well-defined bands, these big jumps in probability, where high card to 2 pair are really take up this really wide band, and then there's like a massive gap, and 3 of a kind through full house, each of those hands is like way less likely than any hand in that first band, and then 4 of a kind and up go to something that is like microscopic.
And sorry, when you say probability, does that mean the likelihood that you will just, without any interference, deal one of these hands?
On 7 cards, yes. So it does then change with transformations, but it still provides, like, you can design the transformations towards maintaining some of these, like, probabilities, like a similar range of probabilities.
Okay, I'm not going to understand this, so you're just going to have you can just keep talking.
Yeah, well, all I'm trying to express is that, like, in the interpretations of these hands that I wrote, I have big jumps in the seriousness based on these bands of probability. And that, to me, both those bands, but also even outside of the bands of probability, just how does outcome of card game translate to the narrative of the situation, feels really in line with establishing that how do these different blackjack outcomes mean the situation went for the wife. It just makes it feel like those 2 characters are doing similar things on different ends of this game in a way that I really like.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, for sort of the prompts that you've written as maybe being here, when you say something like a crisis from today is ongoing, does that mean anything for, like, does that mean they have to hold on to a card, or do they just sort of have to, like, have that in their mind?
Yeah, how I envisioned this was mostly just like they keep that in their mind as they go into the next day's problems, which is always introducing new additional problems. And like it just becomes story fodder that they can keep with them. And when I was sketching this, I think this was also when I was imagining the astronaut doing a little more private journaling.
Yeah.
And so some of these, like, closing outcomes for a day based on the hand would also just be reflected in their final journal. It would be like, and all of these problems are lingering. And then the next day, they might be solved by the time you pick up the first journal entry of the next day. And so this would need tweaking to, like, fit more into the minimalist version of this game, because this was a little more maximalist, and so there was a lot more places for the astronaut to smooth out those edges. Sure. Because I had journal entries at the end of a day and the beginning of a day.
Yeah.
So I think I would need to reinterpret some of these outcomes.
It's really funny that you, while thinking about this, had the astronaut doing considerably more writing than we ever talked about, like the wife or the media doing. But yeah, all of that, the wife wouldn't have any public discords and would just be basically journaling in a private channel, and then at the end of the game just unlock everything,
Yes,
whatever,
everyone gets to see everything.
Yeah.
And we haven't really talked about it, but then there are those, like, ending mechanics that we did talk about with Dylan and Vidya.
Oh yeah, which I think probably it would be fun to do synchronously, like,
totally agreed.
After you've done everything else asynchronously, come back together to do your sort of, like, ending thing. Would be fun.
And those, like, very constrained questions I think we talked about, where you, like, only get to do yes or no answers, which I think were really fun.
And one of the things that's fun about this setup with the Discord is that one of the ways the media player is involved in that ending, even though it's very focused on the experience of the wife and the astronaut, is that obviously the media has to host that conversation in one of their channels.
Oh god, that rules. And like, you've already been giving flavor to these different shows, so like picking what show it's gonna be on. Oh my god, that's so fun.
Yeah, that's great. So that is one version of the game that I think is really fun, and I like that it has such a like designing for a digital space very specifically lets you get really granular with like what are the tools we're going to give you, like
for
the thing of
and structure.
You can invert this card, you can
that too.
JPEG compress it beyond recognizability, whatever. Like it just lets you be really specific with those tools, and I think that's really fun. on sort of the opposite spectrum, there is a version of this game that is a single evening or 2-day LARP mega game experience.
Yeah.
Where you've got maybe still only one astronaut player, but maybe a couple. I don't know how their stuff would integrate with each other. You maybe have an astronaut player and a NASA player or something like that. It's probably something like that, that there's like very few astronauts, and then any other people on that team are sort of the ground control type crew and that kind of thing. And they're absolutely physically moving cards around and doing weird stuff. And then somebody from the NASA group they have to be in a separate room, and they're physically bringing cards from the astronaut and putting them out. And then there's a billion different media players. They all have their own show. They all have their own paper. They all have their own pamphlet and podcast that they're doing.
I really have to get distracted for a moment. The idea that the astronaut and the NASA are on a phone call, and as each of them is transforming cards, NASA has to be like, okay, so they just combine the 7 of diamonds and the 4 of spades. So find our 7 of diamonds or 4 of spades. You know, the like, we have to pour out on the table all the things that they have on the spaceship. You do that by literally, they're reporting to you over the radio how they're transforming their cards, and you have to reconstruct their deck in the same way.
That's so funny. Yeah,
oh my
absolutely.
God.
Yeah, that's great. And like, one of the things I love about building the media into this game is that if there's anything I've learned from various LARP and mega game experiences, and specifically Over Under, if there's something people want to do, it's play media.
Yes.
So let's just build it in. And I think they would have to have some system of like, I bet that the media team in this instance would be doing a lot more like competition with each other for airtime.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Like, they're trying to get people to pay attention to their thing more than other ones. And then I think you have, the how many spouses there are does change based on how many astronauts there are. But then there's also just like, there's a version of this where there is one astronaut, one spouse, everyone else on sort of like the mundane Earth team is neighbors and kids,
people
and just community members
for the wife character.
There's a version of this where the wife and the astronaut are facilitator roles, essentially.
Interesting.
That sort of the rest of the game like rotates around a little bit more. I think that having 3 astronauts and then 3 spouses who can have their own complicated relationships with each other and different like experience levels is interesting. And like, that's also fun because then you get the media players like sucking up to different ones, like realizing like, ooh, this one spouse player is super naive and just thinks that we're all here to help and just spread the word. And so, you know, they'll come on any of our shows, and they're just like doing a lot of that. Meanwhile, somebody playing that person's like teenage kid is like, where the fuck is my mom?
I also want to draw attention to, it's so fascinating to me that you point out the wife and astronaut as potential facilitator roles, and then the media are a bunch of players. Because I think that's really interesting, because to me, the almost more like easier and more natural way to do that is the inverse, where the media is the facilitation team, because that lets, like, in the mega game, the facilitation team is getting together and going like, how can we create problems that are interesting for the players, and then they're running out and being the translation layer of the mechanics to the game. And so as the media, the ability to run back and forth between them and then get your heads together with other media and be like, okay, how do we create our problems for our astronauts and our people left on Earth, feels like easy. But I actually think it's more interesting to invert that and be like, the players are the people doing the reporting and the meaning making, and the like.
Well, and some of the players are also ground control NASA or true. Community people, right?
Yes, the people who orbit around these central figures, and that makes sense for why that role fits there. Yeah.
But also, obviously, from how I've talked about it, the thing I am most drawn towards here is doing that weird media role. So, you know, it makes sense to me. But also, I think, like, it's worth talking about that specifically because I think that the reason I gravitated towards that was because, like, of course they're causing problems and they're doing stuff, but I guess my initial vision of this game was one that is closer to setting stuff up. Oh yeah, well here's how it is. Yes, they are creating problems. They're creating social problems. That's what players should be doing. Like, players are creating weird social problems with each other. And then the astronaut specifically as a facilitator to me was appealing because that is the person who is like doling out the big events. Yes, right? Like they're the ones saying like, here is the big problem that happened.
Yes, because again, in so many mega games, I think it's really interesting analysis because like in so many mega games, the like narrative backbone comes from the facilitator. Like, this is what happens. I legislate what happens, and then the players go to each other and create dilemmas by the nature of communicating with people is hard, or they're communicating at cross purposes. And so I think that's a really interesting way to look at the astronaut generates the narrative of the events that happen, and then the players generate the interesting drama of how you communicate about those events.
Yeah, and I guess like I have no idea how much of the like is this a game where you come in with 50 decks of cards and everyone is actually like passing cards to each other and trying to do stuff? I don't know. Like there are whenever all of my sort of like mega game experiences, I have not been in a role that is mechanically intensive, and so I don't have a really good understanding of what that would even look like. And I know that's its own whole long conversation, but like, do you have just a sort of like impression of like, even if it is not something you've seen done, like how is there an immediate instinct that you have for like, yeah, how does the card stuff still happen beyond the idea that you presented that I love of NASA ground control having to dump a bunch of cards on a deck to recreate something?
I actually think that integrates into an answer to that question really well. I'm going to briefly revisit the like Discord TTRPG version of this, because there's something I haven't talked about from some of the sketching I did between episodes, which is that we talked about laying cards on the table to assemble your ship. And we'd also talked about pocket cards allowing you to do certain card like transformations or destructions, and that those were representative of ground crews helping you, that it was never the astronaut skills, it was always the ground crew. And as I drew all of this out and as I thought about what do cards mean, it started not to make sense to have the face-up cards on the table that you could like reach to do like abilities represent the ship, but instead represent the ground crews, because the parts of the ship were already represented by the value on the card itself, because I had that table of like wiring and navigation and stuff like that. So it wasn't if you pull from this pile, you're pulling from your engine, because where you're pulling from is on the card. And so the different piles weren't different parts of the ship. There was a pile that was mission control, and there was a pile that was the engineers, and there was a pile that was the simulator crew. And so when you used those cards on the table that we talked about with Viditya,
well, this is also because you moved away from the like physical changes of the cards, right?
It is that, but I think it's true regardless, because like those cards, as you transform them, like, you could also be doing physical transformations of those. Oh, I guess I see what you're saying about, like, if those are parts of your ship that you're cannibalizing, you're literally ripping in half. But what I'm saying is that even if you're doing those physical transformations, if you're ripping the card that you pick up in half, what you're ripping in half in the narrative can come from the value on the card. If you rip in half a 9, looking at my table...
But it doesn't have to be about the value.
It doesn't have to. It just felt like it
that's just the direction that you wanted to go with it.
Yeah, it felt like it brought a little more unity, so the cards didn't like get their meanings in different ways from different parts of the system. It was like more like systems that were going wrong in your like cards that you pull, you would interpret them in the same ways. And then it also felt like it helped me as a player when I was thinking about this, because I wanted the information of like who is helping me. Is engineering helping me? Is the simulator crew helping me? Is flight like command helping me? Where does that information come from? And so having that be represented in the piles like felt easier. But you're right that there is a version of this that you work at where
Yeah, I think that's sort of just the point I was like leaning towards, was like, obviously, like, I will stop interrupting after this, but like the conclusions that you came to are conclusions that you came to because of other conclusions that you came to, right?
Yes,
like
that
you
makes
had
sense.
like decisions that you made, and then you went, well, following from that, this should be this, which is game design. That's how that works. And the point I want to make is just to really emphasize, especially in this episode where we're essentially ending by being like, hey, you could make this game, you know, like inviting people to like take part in that process, just to really emphasize, like, we are not saying anything is like a foregone conclusion. We're not saying we had this idea, therefore it has to work like this. There are a lot of different directions
from this in an easy way, but there are other ways you could. Absolutely true. Yes.
Yeah. So that's just sort of, I wanted to like keep that in the air, especially as we're talking about stuff that like we didn't talk through on air, and we're just talking about like stuff that we wrote out and are now presenting as like, here's how I was thinking about this. Just wanted to be really active in making sure there was room for that. And now you can finish your thought.
Great. That was a very good idea to make sure we draw attention to. And so I was imagining these face-up piles of cards on the table that are representing like ideas from ground crew. And so if you have a face-up 9 and 9 is navigation, ground crew has a plan for how you can reroute your flight to solve one of your crises.
Right, which doesn't necessarily say there was a navigation problem, right? Like if you are having a problem with your lights, the solution could be, okay, we're going to reroute you to not be so near the meteor band that is disrupting your electromagnetic whatever, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And this then actually transitions into the mega game version really well, because if the astronaut player is a facilitator, they get to present, here is my poker hand that I have designed to create a problem for you. Hello, ground crews. What cards are you giving me to solve this problem? Often a mega game will take the structure of you're playing in rounds and you have to do a bunch of socializing to figure out what is possible.
Yeah.
And at the end of a round, you go to, not every mega game, but like many, you go to a facilitator and you say, here are my answers for this round. And there's usually like one person who gets to be the person to submit an answer. Like I played a lot of Den of Wolves, which is a very Battlestar Galactica one and very based on the Battlestar Galactica hidden role board game. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a ship's captain, you talk to your crew and all the other ship captains be like, can you get me fuel? Can you get me food? Can you get me this? And then at the end, you have to go and say to the facilitators, I am spending this much of these things on this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so having a facilitator astronaut who goes, here's a hand that is the problem. At the end of this round, tell me what you're giving me that allows me to change this hand.
Yeah.
Those are your answers. And different ground crews are playing with different resources. They essentially, what used to be in the TTRPG version, piles of face-up cards on the table, now become entire groups of people.
Yeah.
And they are outputting a card or something still. And the astronaut facilitator is then using those, but their only things they can use are the things that these other players, that the players are designing for them. And I think that's really interesting. And then the facilitator then gets to make the NASA brief and pass that off to the media. And my media in the mega games I've played has often been one of the least mechanical roles in the ways that you were talking about, like didn't interact as much with the mechanics.
One of the ideas I'm having is like, because I'm stuck on the idea of like, this is a game that involves several decks of cards. Like the media could loosely be, there could be like the hierarchy even in these groups, right? Like there can be a network head who has a deck of cards, or they have a suit of cards, and they are giving them to showrunners or to reporters or to whatever, you know? And like, maybe the cards become essentially a currency of a specific kind, you know? Like media can like get experts on by being like, heard you're working towards a flush or whatever, you know?
Also, ratings. We talked about ratings as
Yeah.
things that in the TTRPG version motivate why you minimize or maximize as you're trying to achieve
Yeah.
certain ratings. And we sketched a little bit of ideas there. The idea that Earth players can give a card to the media that they tune into at the end of a
Yeah.
round, and that's ratings, is like
Uh-huh.
how many people choose you as the network to get their news from. You could literally
Yeah.
have separate rooms where different people give briefings, and you can't be in every one. Like,
Yeah.
you're giving it in 3, and as your entry, your ticket is you give them the card for the round that you have, and then next round the players that the cards that the media players have is their ratings, and then the network exec gets a little bit of extra to like grease wheels.
Yeah, I think it's really funny if there's a like the round structure is like all of the just sort of earth like mundane people. And I think that the experts that the media calls on are also mundane people.
Oh, totally.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, and so there's a little bit of a like you can just play someone who is a psychic. Your job is that you're a psychic, and sometimes the media is going to call on you and have you do a reading of the situation and that kind of thing. But having the round structure be like, at the end of the day, everyone turns the TV on.
Yeah.
Everyone. You know, you have to. And that is like symbolized in some way by like, go to the room of the channel that you are watching and absorb the report that is being given, and like that is noted down and the ratings are taken. And that there's there's so much of this that is so delightful to me, of just like the specific, then you have everybody going and like mingling the next day and being like, oh my god, were you watching X yesterday? You weren't? You have to. They keep getting they have this like retired professor who was part of the team that built the engine.
The
Not
natural
of this
social
mission, but like
dynamics of this?
the last mission. Yeah. And just like everybody gossiping about the different channel that they watched, and like that you actually have to put on a good show. Because if you put on a good show or you get a really good guest, oh, and also you probably halfway through the round have an opportunity to post a single ad.
We have to build this version. We have to. I have to play this. I have to be in this. I need this so much.
And everyone is just like, and the background of all of this is this disaster that's happening in space. And so, of course, you have a few people who are more personally affected being like, no, I don't want to go. I understand that everybody wants to go to this one show. I don't want to go to that one. They're not saying very nice things about my family.
Yeah.
And I know that it's apparently very compelling. No, I'm going to go watch the one that is just reporting the facts.
And one of the nice things about like a LARP and mega game structure is that you get to supply a variety of motivations. Like you get like your character card or whatever, and it's like, this is what you care about. You want the most interesting blank. You want the blank that is comforting to you. And then also when you're talking about like trying to get experts on your show, you even can do like an OU style money mechanic where cards are also money, and you pay people to be on your show. And so some people like your goal at the end is to like be paid the most.
Well, that's what I was sort of gesturing at with the first thing I said of like cards being currency.
Yes, that's exactly playing off of that.
Yeah.
That like Earth people, not just media people, want to collect it, but also Earth people might want to collect it, which I hadn't been thinking of, and maybe you already were.
Yeah, just I mean, I think it's just there's the design goal in there would be like, how do you make the constant flow of these cards interesting?
100%.
Like they're going to the media, they're coming from the media. What is the economy of that? All of that. There's a lot of balancing weirdness there. And I think that hilariously, this version of it makes the so what I was going to say is this version of it makes the NASA players the most isolated.
Yeah.
One of the things I would love ideally in this version of the game is the concept of shifts. Like you're in ground control a lot of the time, but sometimes you get sent home. And so now you are just a mundane player for this round.
And you end up in like the party where everyone's navigating social situations. Yeah. Oh god.
Like having to like, and of course it can be exaggerated because there's overtime, there's whatever. Ooh, and you could even have the silly situation of like, well, we sent so and so home because they were on overtime, but they have the King of Hearts. And we fucking need the King of Hearts. And so you like send a ground crew out to be like, hi, we need you to come in. We need you to come in for a shift. And that has to happen physically because then everyone sees that happen. And there's a reporter nearby being like, oh, they're calling some of their crew in. What's the emergency? Why do you need somebody to come in? You know?
Oh my God, I'm so lost in this, but I'm now also thinking about like, well, how do you know which briefing to go to besides just the gossip? And I'm imagining like, you know, that news segment that's like, tonight, 9 p.m.
Yeah,
we
that's
have
what
a
I was saying.
special.
You have one opportunity to post an ad.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing, which would be amazing.
Fuck.
The little
I want
teasers.
this game
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I'm very endeared to both versions of these games, and one of the things I particularly like about them as two extremes is I really do picture the Discord version taking some time. Like, you are allowed to play it over the course of like days, weeks, just really stretch it out. Whereas the Mega Game version, 6 high intensity hours.
Yep.
You know?
I was going to say exactly that. Yep.
Every hour is a day or something like that, you know, that kind of thing.
God.
Which I love that to be on both ends of that.
This rules.
Yeah.
This should be a game.
Okay. Many are saying this.
Many are saying this. We're saying this. Well, once a week, listeners.
Uh-huh. Ish. On average less, but.
Yeah.
Well, this was fantastic. I'm feeling so good about everything we talked about here. Are there briefly, like, any sort of open questions that you have that are pretty specific that you would like to sort of propose to people if someone is interested in like exploring designing one of the versions of these games? Is there a specific thing that you think that is like, here's something that you might really want to iterate on? I don't think I have anything because I think that we covered a lot of ground here, but I just want to open that up to be like, if there's a specific thing, now's the time.
Yeah, I think we really did cover a lot of ground. If I'm thinking about the TTRPG version today, I got this sense of a game where the astronaut is assembling poker hands and they mean certain crises and they're posting these updates, and that's the core of what they're doing. And then the media player is receiving these and generating a bunch of news based on them and manipulating those cards in a maybe like solitaire-ish or organizing-y way. And then those cards that they manipulate from what they got from the astronaut go down to the wife, who's doing like a blackjacky thing that is how many things she's juggling and how well or poorly it's going, while also pulling from oracle tables that give these things meaning and writing journal entries that like capture these meanings. And so that really leaves questions of, what does the solitary experience, not solitary, solitaire-ish experience look like for the media? Especially
given that they will be potentially dealing with unpredictable card types.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, how do you build something that is, you need to categorize cards, and also you might get some impossible cards.
Yes, 100%. And then that leaves open questions for the astronaut of, what are those card transformations? How are we wrecking this deck? And also, does this integrate at all? We didn't talk about this a ton. We talked with Viditya about like a slow reveal structure that's Texas Hold'em-y. You look at 3 cards, and then you look at a 4th card, you look at a 5th card. So there's a lot of open questions on like, how do you make meaning of that? Do you have a ship or ground crew set of face-up cards? And how does that interact with transforming cards? So lots of open questions about the specifics of implementing that for the astronaut. Mm-hmm. And then for the wife, like, what meaning do you give to like hitting and staying, and what exactly do the bands define? And then there's just all of the, implementation details of like oracle tables and meaning tables and just like assigning meaning making to these different things. But that's always going to be at the end of an episode like this. Like, you got to fill out a bunch of content, but just structurally, how does the solitaire-ish thing work including those weird cards, and then what is the details of weird blackjack and weird Texas Hold'em for the astronaut and the spouse.
Yeah, that all sounds correct to me. And if anyone listening, if you are intrigued by all of these concepts and you want to try your hand at making a game that approaches these things, please do. Please let us know. Join the Discord, chat about your thoughts, playtest it, whatever. We will be posting some version of the notes that we took and sort of our sketches and that kind of thing on the Patreon, so you can join there to get those. And I think that's about it. I think that this has been our Apollo 13 series, and I love that we explored two very different modes of how to express that. It's exciting to me that we could sort of like have these core ideas that we developed and then have two ways of exploring similar things. That's really fun, and I hope that people choose to do the same. I hope that they come up with some new weird ways to do all of this. Sometimes, hey, somebody listening is going to sit down and go, I'm going to make this game. And then in 18 months, we're going to get a DM that says, so this is a game that I made that started as the game that you talked about, but now it is not that. It is something completely different that has nothing in common with that. Here it is. And we're going to be like, awesome.
You're the best. Absolutely. I've hacked many a system, and that's been the result.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, this was wonderful. Jess, where can people find you?
They can find me pretty much anywhere as at jessfrom.online or at jessfrom.online on Bluesky. Find me on my website, jessfrom.online, and you can find me as Jumpgate Games. This is probably very near the end of the window in which you can get Galactic and Going Rogue as a late pledge on Kickstarter. And so nab that if you're interested in getting some of my games, and if you like games that happen in space. And yeah, I think that's everything. How about you?
You can find me on Bluesky at potatochips.gaygothvibes.online. You can find my stuff generally at gaygothvibes.online. You can join the Haunted Table Patreon at $3 or above to grab The House Edge, which is a game that I've been working on with that crew that is a Fist Triangle Agency crossover card crawler roguelike time loop situation. It's pretty incredible. Been doing a lot of work and playtesting on that up on the Patreon behind that $3 paywall. And I think that's about it. Great. This has been This Should Be a Game, about the moment where you say this should be a game.
This should be a game. This really should be a game. I want this game.
Thank you to Cris for the logo, and thank you to Nicky Flowers for the theme song. Follow the show on Bluesky at thisshouldbeaga.me and join the Discord at discord.thisshouldbeaga.me to talk games with us. Support the show financially on Patreon to vote on movies and genres that we cover and see the notes we take during the movie and stuff.